the vision I have for homesteading in America is that you start, do what you can in the space you have. Don't wait for some mythical future that may or may not come, where you have everything you need to do all of the things you want. My friends, the day is here. Epic Homesteading is out now, and this is the Suburban Homesteading Primer Week from me to you. Just like the olden days on the podcast, I am coming to you pure, unadulterated, just Kevin Espiritu, just the plant daddy, and for this week, the homesteading father. Welcome to the week. I'm so excited because I've been having some conversations with folks about homesteading and what it means. And I think it should mean a lot more than most people think it means these days. When you think of homesteading, you think, okay, I need to go out into the woods. I need to buy 200 acres. I need to go into a rural area. I need to live sort of isolated. I don't think that's the vision that personally excites me right now in my life as far as homesteading goes, which is why I wrote the Epic Homesteading book, which is out now. So in this first episode this week, I want to take you through the philosophy that I have and sort of go behind the curtain and share some facts and stories about the initial epic gardening journey and the homesteading journey that you may have never heard before. So it starts with the house I used to be in, the small sort of front yard urban garden. And I mentally called that a homestead. And now you're probably listening, you're like, dude, come on. It's like 7 raised beds. That's not a homestead. You're not providing anywhere near enough food. It doesn't really count. And I think that's part of the problem where people just think I can't get started because I live in an XYZ. I only have a balcony. I have a townhouse. I have no space. And you'd be shocked at how much you can produce if you're tactical and you're specific of things that either cost a lot of money, are hard to source in your area, are nutritionally dense but hard to transport. So whatever your reason is, I mean, back then, I literally lived off my garden in that small front yard with some bartering, fishing, and foraging for a full month. And that was maybe a couple hundred square feet. So the vision I have for homesteading in America, for homesteading in your home, is that you start, do what you can in the space you have. Don't wait for some mythical future that may or may not come, where you have everything you need to do all of the things you want. It's about epic homesteading. What is that? That is a modern approach to homesteading in a suburban environment. So when I got to the new house, the house that I'm in now, not so new anymore, it's been about 3 years. What did I see? I saw basically a 1,000 square foot home in suburban area of San Diego, not in a fancy area of town, not really having any amenities whatsoever. It's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, tiny little bathroom. And I could afford it 3 years ago. I was like, okay, I can afford this home. Never thought I'd really be able to afford a home in San Diego, but here I am. And I put my down payment down. And what did I see in the backyard? Nothing but weeds. What did I see in the front yard? Nothing but a scraped off bit of sod with some wood chips on it. Fortunately, natural wood chips. The only saving grace, almost an homage to the old garden that I had, was a loquat tree, which for some of you original gardeners who've been listening for a long time, watching the YouTube channel, you'll know the only tree I had at the old house was a very small loquat tree. There was a bigger loquat tree on the property. I took it as an omen and I said, you know what? This is where I'm going to plant my ground. And I'm going to see what I can do in the space that I have. I'm not going to go peace out to, the northern territories of Canada and try to do it on my own completely off grid. So I started out with the simplest possible approach. I said, I don't even have my raised beds anymore. I'll do an in-ground garden. I don't have a place to put anything that I need to get started. So the first thing I'll do is get a shed going. And so each year it's about looking at what you want and how far you can get in that year, and also considering the types of resources your particular area is abundant in and the types of resources that you might be lacking. So take my area, San Diego, and you'll see this in the book. The book has sections on chicken keeping, on solar energy, on rainwater capture, on gray water systems, on preserving, canning, etc. So really all of the core components to get you started on a sustainable homestead type approach to a suburban garden. But in my area in San Diego, the immediate focus was energy, right? We're abundant in sunlight. In fact, we barely get any rain, which comes into play a little bit later on in this week. So I said, you know what? The first thing I need to get solar on the house. I did the calculations. In my particular case, in my particular climate, not only did I have a federal rebate of about 22%, but I also knew that based on the amount of sun and energy I used at the prices energy would have cost me were I to pay for it, I was in about a 5-6 year payback period, which for solar is pretty damn fast. So that was my first move. It was putting a shed on the property and putting solar on the roof. Now, yeah, you do have to have a little bit of capital to get going on a project like that, but there's ways to finance it. There's ways to save up. There's ways to start smaller and add more later, right? And so that's what I ended up doing. And I chose to go ahead and purchase it outright instead of a lease or instead of a payment plan. I was just in a position where I'd saved up money to be able to do that. As the years have gone on, I've added gray water systems on my shower and on my laundry and on my outdoor shower. In fact, my citrus orchard, which is also in the book, How to Care for and Start Your Very Own Suburban sort of Homestead Orchard, that's watered completely with gray water. The artichoke patch that I have is watered completely with gray water. The backyard is primarily watered with rainwater capture out of about 5,000 gallons worth of storage. And so as the years have gone on, I watched the space and I said, where should my gardens go? Where should my orchard go? Where should my rainwater capture go? And that's where you get into like almost a homestead permaculturist approach. And you say, I don't think that I made the right choice a couple years ago because I wasn't thinking about where the rain might flow or where the sun might shine. When I started getting into this, I did not understand how specifically solar worked. So let's just run through the bare bones basics, keeping in mind that a lot of the particulars very much depend on the state you live in and your energy company's policies. So I'll speak to what I'm doing here. You'll have to do a little bit more research in your area. But the first thing to think about, what do you have when you turn on the light, right? What happens? Well, energy, electricity is pulled from the grid, which we hear about, we don't really think about, and it's what powers all of our homes, right? And so when you want to get off the grid, you might think, okay, well, let's just get some solar power. Then the sun is hitting the panels are generating electricity. That electricity is going directly into my toaster, right? Well, it turns out that's not actually how it works. Your house is, of course, connected to the grid because that's how it's drawing energy from the grid. And when you put solar on the roof of your home, what's actually happening, unless you have a battery, which I'll get into that, but unless you have a battery, what happens is the solar energy generated is actually just going to the grid. And you're sort of netting out what you use versus what you produce. And so if you have a super old meter, you can actually literally see it spin backwards as you produce more than you consume. I do not have one, so I actually have a little graphic on my meter that's connected to my house. Almost in all cases, you'll see an arrow pointing in a particular direction, let's say left. If it's pointing to the left, it's basically saying, hey, your house is using more energy than it's producing. And if you don't have solar, that's always going to be the case. You're not producing anything. But in my case, with 24 panels on the top of my house and about an 8.5 kilowatt hour system, I sometimes see it spin the other way. And it's actually very cool and very exciting to see that. And what that means is I am on the net producing more than I'm consuming. And the way that works at a high level is you're not off the grid. So if the grid goes down, if there's a power outage, blackout, brownout, the solar doesn't do anything for you. Sorry to say, this is something that I think a lot of people do not understand, and I did not at the beginning of my personal solar energy journey. I thought, okay, well, cool. I'll just, it'll trickle in and I'll just use whatever I can use. and how naive I was. But there's nothing wrong with being naive as long as you are learning along the way, which is what I did, and hopefully what we are doing right now. So let's just say it's January right now. It's not a great month for solar. Obviously, the days are shorter, the sun is lower. Nevertheless, I will still be generating. So let's just say I generate 1,000 kilowatt hours worth of electricity and I use 1,000. Well, then the only thing I have to pay that month is my connection fee to the grid. And that's, in my case, with my energy company, it's either $10 or $15 a month. And it's sort of them just saying, hey, this is basically an administrative fee for the ability to be connected to the grid. Kind of annoying because I'd love to see a $0 bill, but it'll never be the case for me. The most I would ever pay, the least would be $120 a year, right? $10 a month times 12 months. So that would be the case if I just generated exactly what I consumed. Let's say I generate 500 and use 1,000. Well, now in the net, I've used 500, right? So I'm billed for that amount based on the time of day that I use it. Most energy companies around the country are going to contextually bill you a different price per kilowatt hour based on the time that you use it because it is a grid, it's a network, right? So if a lot of people are using it, it's more expensive, AKA from like 6 to 9 p.m., quite expensive hours. Those are usually called peak hours or super on peak or on peak hours. And then you have things like your super off peak hours, like 1 a.m. to 7 a.m. That's typically a super off peak hour where you're not really expecting to be competing with many people for energy usage. Everyone's asleep. No one's really doing too much, right? Now let's take the most interesting case. This would be where you are producing way more energy than you are consuming. I've had months where I've produced about 2,000 kilowatt hours and I've only used 600. So what happens? Does good old San Diego Gas and Electric cut old Plant Daddy a check? No, they do not. Unfortunately, they do not. But they do something that's close. And what they do is something called net metering. So they'll say, hey, you generated 2,000 kilowatt hours this month. You only used 500. So you actually gave us 1,500 kilowatt hours. Thank you. Here's what we'll do for you. We will give you 1,500 kilowatt hours times a price per kilowatt hour, whatever that price might be 10 cents, 20 cents, 5 cents. And then that dollar amount will accrue as a negative balance in your account that you can sort of spend against. Think of it almost as like a gift card that if you actually go a little over 1 month, you're not pulling from zero. You don't actually owe them. You're actually pulling from your bank of sort of saved up energy that you've generated. So that's what net energy metering is. Not every state has it. And even the ones who do, it doesn't work the exact same way everywhere. But that's the real reason to get solar. At least in my opinion, is you can delete your energy bill. Eventually, on a payback period basis, you start to go positive, right? Because you're outright some amount of cost for your solar panels. In my particular case, I believe it was somewhere around $17,000. Now, I put a lot of panels on my house, and I'm in a more expensive sort of area for that service, and it was also an expensive time to get that service. So you really want to do the quotes, do the math. But basically what you're doing is you're saying, how much am I out of pocket for? And how much will I be saving on a monthly basis? Thus, how many months will it take before I break even? And the first month after you break even, of course, you are net saving money over the long term. And you also have a bit more freedom and a bit more leeway, in my opinion at least, to install systems, use energy in ways in your house that benefits you and your family and perhaps even helps you become more sustainable. And the reason I say that is because let's just say it gets to be December 2024 as we listen to this episode, and I'm over here generating electricity. And by the end of the year, the overall generation that I've done is probably, I don't know, call it 2,000 kilowatt hours in the green, as in I've produced on the net 2,000 more than I consumed over the whole year. Well, what happens at the end of the year? Then it wipes to zero. That's called your true up month. You can't really carry it over in my case. So the incentive here is to use pretty much what you produce. So, in my case, I generate a ton in the summer and I'm not using a lot of energy. As I get towards the fall, winter, it gets a little colder. I don't really have an insulated home. It's like 100 years old almost. I think this year it'll be 100 years old. So I'll throw the heater on and I'll start eating into that balance. By the end of December, there's no real point for me to hold any sort of negative balance because I'm not getting anything for it at that point in time. Now, I wish that changed. I really do. I really wish that you could get some sort of credit or it could accrue, because then at a societal level, what we'd see is we would see way more people putting solar on their homes, and a net benefit would accrue to the grid as a whole, and probably society itself would be better off. So I hope those policies change. But the only way you sort of get out of this system that I've just described, off the grid while in the grid, so to speak, would be to explore whole home batteries. Now, it's not something I've done, and it's not something that I have plans to do right now. Reason being, I'm hoping battery technology gets a lot better, and I'm hoping it gets a lot more affordable. But the only way you can really get off the grid while still being in a suburban home connected to the grid is a battery system. And so the way that would work is the solar you generate is charging your batteries up first, then the surplus would go to the grid. And then what would happen is during the most peak hours of the day, when you would be pulling from the grid and accruing sort of that per kilowatt hour price, you'll actually be pulling from your battery. And of course, that's true stored solar energy. So then if the grid was to go down and your batteries were charged, voila, you have at least some period of time where you can power your home. Now, it's going to be not very long, maybe 48 hours or something like that. But every day you would start generating more. So you'd fill up more and then you sort of draw it down, fill it up, draw it down. But it's pretty tough to make that work right now from a technological perspective. So that would be a primer on solar. Like I said, I've got 24 solar panels on my house and I have not paid a significant electricity bill in 2 years. And it's been great. So I'm maybe 3 more years until I'm break even on it. And then I'll be sort of pure profit, so to speak, or producing in a way where my electricity bill just really doesn't matter very much. But that does not mean there aren't other ways to use energy systems on your property that are beneficial to you. So one I think is extremely underrated would be electric heat pumps, or mini splits as they're called. So what these can do, these are basically room dependent air conditioning units that I have one in my office right now. I have one in my bedroom. I have one in my kitchen. And so if I'm not in my kitchen, let's say I'm in the office all day today, why would I have a whole house air conditioner blowing through every vent in the home? It's inefficient, right? So I have a mini split, which has an outdoor system that's drawing the air in and sort of pumping it through. And then I have these mini splits that are attached to the top of a wall in a home, in a particular room. And they can heat, they can cool, they can fan, they can dehumidify, etc. And because they're way more efficient and only in a specific room, you're drawing way less energy. And heating and cooling is one of the most energy intensive systems in the standard American home. So by doing this, you're getting more efficient with your energy production with the solar on top, maybe a battery if that's something that you're into. And then you're deleting a ton of energy usage from the most intensive historical system that most Americans use. So to me, those are the biggest 2 areas to focus on. So let's talk about setting up an orchard. First of all, why is this so important in a suburban setting for an epic homestead style approach? Well, because it is the ultimate in perennial food production that is absolutely delicious, absolutely nutritious, and you can get flavors and flavor profiles that you simply can't really buy unless you're hitting up a farmer's market, right? If you go to the store, you can't get 15 different types of citrus. If you go to the store, you can't get 7 different types of peaches. But in your own homestead, of course, you can certainly grow, I'm not going to say anything, but like almost anything that you want to in the world of fruit trees. So I will explain my personal approach and why I'm such a big believer in it. And a lot of this is inspired by a guy from Dave Wilson Nursery. His name is Tom Spellman. And one of his big philosophies was, you don't have to follow the old school orcharding rules if you are a backyard orchardist. And what I mean by that is when you go up, I live here in California, when you go up to Northern California, Central California, you drive through these big production fields for peaches, apples, apricots, pears, all these sorts of trees. You see them planted a certain amount of feet apart, usually quite far. They've grown very, very tall, especially when they're in flower and in fruit. And it's just not the way that you would expect to harvest it in a home situation. And the reason is because you typically don't want hundreds and hundreds of pounds of, let's say, one fruit in a backyard orchard scenario. What you typically want is a high quality fruit and a reasonable amount of it for a specific period of time. So what I mean by that is, take peaches. You probably can't get through 300 plus peaches in a single year if you're yourself or a small family, especially if you have other fruit trees on your property, especially if those fruit trees start fruiting at the same time. So what we're trying to do with an Epic Homestead style orchard is select things you absolutely love to eat. Number one, select things that absolutely grow well in your area. Number two, select things and plant them in a way that they produce the highest quality fruit at an amount that you want. And then the final one is smooth out your selection of trees in your orchard such that every month something fun is coming out of the orchard that you can use in your kitchen. So the way that I have approached this is by taking a look at a calendar year and saying, what are the fruits I love? When do the fruits I love have their harvest windows? Is it January to March? Is it just the month of June? Is it later in the year in November? And then I basically created a little bit of a sheet and I said, I have space for 20 trees. I want to do 20 trees. And trust me, if you think 20 is a lot, you can do a lot more than you think with the spacing recommendations I'm about to share with you. But I said, okay, cool. I want citrus. I want some stone fruits, which are peaches, plums, nectarines, those sorts of things. I want to try an apple. I want to try a couple subtropicals, like maybe I'll try a papaya, see if I can pull it off. I want to do some avocado. I want to do some grape. And I looked at the ripening window for those. And basically any time of the year, one of those will be fruiting. So I'll have something coming out. Now, I might not have the thing I want at that point in time. For example, peaches in my particular homestead are really only in season for about 4 or 5 weeks in June and July. So I need to eat my peaches then or preserve them if I want them. But man, is it nice when June or July rolls around and you get those peaches. So what I did then is I said, great, now I'm going to select the varieties that work well in my area. And so I don't want to harp on citrus too much because I know a lot of you watching on the video podcast at the Beet podcast on YouTube or listening in your ears right now probably are like, dude, I just can't grow citrus. And that's completely fine. But to take an example of, let's say, a peach, I'm growing the Eva's Pride peach. And the reason I chose that one is because it has a lower chill hour requirement. Some fruit trees require themselves to be exposed to cold temperatures for them to produce well every season. And me being in a warmer climate, I need to choose trees that have a low chill hour requirement, meaning they don't need that many hours below a certain temperature because it doesn't usually get that cold in my area. Now, if you live in a zone 4, 5, 6, your world actually opens up with some of these stone fruits, apples, pears, plums, that sort of thing. The varieties you can choose is pretty vast compared to someone like myself. I have basically 2 apples that I could choose from, the Dorset Golden and the Anna apple. So step 2, when designing your orchard, once you've picked the fruits in general that you want to grow, is to pick the varieties of those fruits. And a lot of the variety picking, at least in my case, was based on flavor profile, ripening window, and that chill hour requirement, or basically how well it will do in your particular growing zone and climate. After that, you really get into the sourcing part of the equation. And so the way that you want to approach sourcing, you have 2 paths you can walk down. Number 1 is bare root. And if you're listening to this podcast series when it's out, which is January, February of 2024, it is bare root season right now. This is the beginning of the year. This is when you can get your bare root trees. What is a bare root? It's exactly what it sounds like. It is a stick with some peat moss or coconut coir wrapped around the roots at the bottom, probably a little burlap sack, and you can buy these trees for not very much money. It's under $50 usually for a tree like this. Why? Because it's quite inexpensive to ship and produce these trees relative to your other path, which is a live tree. Now, a live tree you can buy at a year old, at 2 years old, 3 years old, 5 years old. But what's going to happen is that cost is going to kind of go up exponentially based on the amount of years it's grown. Now, why would you grow bare root? Typically, you can get a little bit more variety selection out of a bare root, so you can find one that maybe you wouldn't be able to find in a live. Secondly, it's a budget play. You're going to take a little bit longer to actually produce fruit off of that tree, but you're going to save a lot more money up front. If you go the live route, you can go with a 1 year or a 3 year. Those are typically the years that are offered. And I personally think it's smart to go with the oldest tree that's healthy that you can afford. And the reason I say that is because once you get your orchard into production mode, and that can take 1 to 3 years to really get it going, the world is sweet, my friends. The world is sweet and it tastes amazing. And I'm at that point right now with my citrus orchard, my peaches, my apples. Some of those beautiful, beautiful plants are just producing like crazy. And I'm finally realizing the abundance of the homestead orchard. And so that's why I say if you can buy a little bit more expensive tree that's older and very, very mature, you're going to skip years of growth, which means that you're going to get fruit faster and for many, many more years to come than you otherwise would have. So that's why I think you should invest. Think of a tree certainly as an investment in your homestead, in your own health, and in your own diet and the flavors that come out of that. Because frankly, I'll just say this. I've spent $100, $150 on way dumber things than an incredible fruit tree. After you get into that, you've got your trees. How the heck are you supposed to space these trees? Well, the easiest way to think about this is you can space them way closer than you think. For example, sometimes you can do what's called 2 or 3 or 4 in one hole. Now, it doesn't mean literally right next to one another, but in my case, I've taken my avocados and I've planted 2 of them a foot apart, and effectively they're going to grow as 2 halves of one larger tree, if that makes sense. I'll prune out the middles where they connect to one another, and the other side will grow out, and I have these 2 beautiful avocados. In that case, I did it because avocados have an A and a B type, where the flowers, male and female, will open up at different times. So having an A and a B at the same time is really nice. That's why I did that. Also, you can plant them very close together because you are not letting these get to their genetic potential. What you're doing is something called summer pruning. So every summer, you're actually coming down and cutting the height of your fruit trees down to about 6 to 8 feet maximum, which is why you get less fruit because you're removing material, but you usually tend to get really nice high quality fruit, especially if you care for the trees well. And then from there, you also don't have to worry as much about what's called a rootstock. Rootstock would be the bottom part of the tree, the roots and below, that has been grafted with a tree above it. So like in the case of citrus, a lot of citrus, certainly most apples are grafted. The rootstock genetics are actually different from the genetics up top. And sometimes you'll do full-size tree, semi-dwarf rootstock, dwarf rootstock, and that will meter out the height of the tree. You don't even have to really care about that with backyard orchard culture technique because you're pruning it to 6 to 8 feet no matter what. So you're dwarfing the tree by your own pruning. Water systems are equally important. It really depends on where you live and how much you value different types of resources. So in my area in San Diego, I do not have a lot of water. It doesn't fall too much from the sky, so I do my best to capture and reuse as much as I can. So let's first talk about some of the easiest and lowest lift things you can do to make better use of water on your homestead property. The very first thing would be to just utilize simple gray water systems. I say simple, meaning not even any install. I know people who will just take the drain out of their sink and they'll put a bucket beneath it and then they'll just use that. Maybe it's an outdoor sink. They'll do that even in the kitchen. I mean, if you get more extreme. Now, the one thing I will caution is that kitchen wastewater is actually not considered gray water. it's not considered gray water quality. It's actually considered black water because you can get things like, oil residues, all sorts of different waste materials that typically you do not want to be using in a landscape situation. So buyer beware on that. Do your own research on if you decide to use kitchen wastewater. But when you get to the next level, there is one device in your home that is almost perfectly built for a gray water application, and that would be your laundry machine. And the reason why is because a laundry machine already has a built-in pump, meaning that if you install what's called a three-way valve, and I'll talk about how to do that in a second, you can shunt that water to any part of your property that you want as long as you've piped it up correctly, and I'll talk about how to do that. But it pumps automatically because when the laundry starts to drain, it's going to pump that water out for you. So the things you have to know about this: number one, check your local regs because you can oftentimes get a rebate on your laundry gray water systems. In some locales, you can even get it for free. It'll just get completely covered and someone will come out and install it for you, or they'll reimburse you for the parts and the install. So the way to think about this: number one, yes, you do have to change your detergent. Absolutely. I use a product called Oasis, biodegradable, and doesn't harm any plants at all. And actually, I will use this to grow my artichokes. So I'm even using the gray water to grow an edible plant. The one thing I'll say is I probably wouldn't use gray water in like a potato patch or in a maybe even a lettuce patch or something like that. Why? Because the water is being more directly used by the actual part of the plant that I'm going to eat. But it's really great for perennial vegetable patches like artichokes, or you could use it for your orchard, and I'll get to how I'm using that in a second. But you really just have to get a three-way valve and plumb that up such that the water pipes from the laundry to the patch that you want. In my case, I used a friend of mine in the area who is trained in these types of installs, but laundry gray water is one of the ones that if you're a bit handy, you can definitely do it yourself. When we get into the next stage of water conservation in the gray water category, that's going to be your shower gray water. Now, I went crazy with mine, and I actually have an actuator underneath my house that I can flip a little switch and it'll turn a pipe. It's another three-way valve, but it'll turn a pipe because I can't really get there on my own to go into the house and do it. And if I turn it one way, it goes to the sewer. So the shower water will go to the sewer. And if I do it the other way, it will go to my citrus orchard. I also have an outdoor shower. That one was easier to plumb. It doesn't go to the sewer at all. It just goes straight to my citrus orchard. And it's been incredibly productive. And again, yes, you do have to use a different type of soap. I personally use Dr. Bronner's, and that's the only product that I use. So it's water and a little bit of Dr. Bronner's that will go into the orchard every single time that I take a shower. So those are ways that you can reuse existing water. That's just out of the city tap. I'm using it once for the shower or the laundry. I'm using it a second time for the landscape. Now, there's also water that falls from the sky. It's called rain. I know I don't get a lot of it, but it does exist, and many of you listening and watching have a lot more rain than I do. And so the thing I'll say first about rainwater capture is it really is not a cost-effective thing to do. If you're trying to save money on water, like you're calculating how much you're going to capture versus how much you would have paid for that water, the math isn't super favorable because water is, in some ways, thankfully, pretty inexpensive from the city in most locales relative to like how much you actually get if you capture rain. So the thing I'd say about capturing rainwater is this is something you have to want to do on a philosophical level for the benefit of the environment, or also for your own home security, your home safety, and just resource management. In my case, I really feel that it's important because I don't get a lot of rain on my property. So I need to make sure that I conserve as much as I can and reuse that. And frankly, my plants love rainwater a lot more. There's a little bit more nitrogen in rainwater, so they tend to do a lot better with that as compared to the city tap. There's also no chlorine, chloramine, etc. in that water, which I find to be a really great benefit. So the way that you need to do this is you have to have some sort of gutter system on your roof. That has to pipe into some sort of filtration system. The way that mine works is I have what's called a leaf filter. So after the gutter, it'll hit a leaf filter. That gets all the big debris off. Then there's a vertical pipe. That vertical pipe collects maybe the first 20 gallons of water. That's called a first flush filter. That just collects all the initial little particulate and dust. Then it'll run into a tank. So that tank can be 50 gallons, it can be 200 gallons. It could be 2,000 gallons. In my case, I have a couple tanks going off of my shed and off of the front of my house. I think they're both about 100 to 200 gallons. And then I have a very large cistern. Cistern is just the word for a much larger rain tank. So I have a 5,000 gallon cistern at the corner of my lot, and all the water off of my roof goes through the filters that I mentioned, comes down that pipe, and then via gravity, it will actually make its way across the yard to that cistern. And the way a gravity-fed system works is as long as the entry point of the water into the piping system is higher than the exit point of the water into the cistern, gravity will drop that water into that system. It's actually a very beautiful thing. Sometimes with the way that the landscape looks, you can't even really tell which one's higher than the other. Nevertheless, when you open the cistern top up, you see water falling in when it rains. So it's really, really cool. Now, from a cost perspective, again, you can get rebates on cisterns. It doesn't remove that much of the cost, maybe $200-$300 usually. On rainwater capture barrels, you can actually get a pretty decent rebate. Sometimes they'll even give them to you for free from the city. It really depends on your local city municipality, but I think a lot of them are supportive of this. It really also depends on the state. Some states aren't as supportive of capturing rainwater, although currently none of the 50 states actually ban it. Colorado is the most strict. Even they do not technically ban it. You can have, I believe, 55 or 110 gallons of rainwater captured in Colorado even. So it's not a ton, but hey, it'll get your herb bed water. You can grow some lettuce with it. It's still a nice little touch. So when you get into the rainwater capture, if you're talking about simple systems off of an existing gutter, you can rig those up yourself no problem with a rain barrel, and you'll have a completely functional system. If you're talking about a cistern install in the multiple thousand gallons, it's really good to get an installer, and I'd just be searching around for a local rainwater tank installer in your area. And that price, it's really mostly the price of a big cistern, can run you a couple grand. It can be a little bit expensive, but it's, to me, again, it's an investment. If I have 5,000 gallons of fresh rainwater and we actually ever did run into a water problem or some sort of drought or something like that, I'm in a much better position than I would have otherwise been. And so that is the reason that I felt it was worth the cost. But there's, like I said, many more cost-effective ways to do this. Of course, there's other things that you can do that delve more into the world of gardening that help conserve water, using mulch properly, building swales, building curves into your landscape that direct the water that falls on the ground, because you can capture everything off a roof, but there's still water falling directly on the ground that you need to figure out how to best shunt. Okay, we're talking about chickens and mini livestock. The only one I have direct experience with is chickens. So that's the one I'm going to focus on, but there's some material in the book about keeping ducks, quail, and bees written with the help of some of my friends who have more experience growing and cultivating those types of livestock. So let's talk about chickens first. The thing that you have to know about chickens is, to me, in a homestead, they are probably the ultimate animal from the perspective of, like, you get eggs, you get protein, you get garden benefits. They're going to come through, scratch up the dirt, leave their droppings in the dirt, eat pests, all that sort of good stuff. You have recyclers. You can actually throw your garden waste in there. You can throw your food scraps in there from the kitchen. They'll eat that. And you have companionship, and you have sort of the beauty of life being cultivated around you. You can also get the experience of raising them from baby chicks, which is highly, highly rewarding. Now, what I will say is you also have the downside of that. We've lost one of my 10 hens. We lost Gucci sometime around May of last year. It was an egg-bound situation that we weren't able to detect in time, and she unfortunately passed away. And that's shocking. I mean, when you see that, especially for the first time, it really, really hits you hard. And, it was a tough day, and wanted to do her honor. So I buried her in the garden and recycled her body into the garden. We grew a giant pumpkin over her body, and we really felt like we had done her a service and an honor. Now, you're going to have the circle of life. You can raise your hens from eggs. You can hatch the eggs. The issue with hatching from eggs is that you won't know if you have a male or a female. And in your area, it's more than likely the case that you cannot have a rooster. If you're in a suburban area, you cannot have a rooster most of the time. Some jurisdictions allow it. Mine does not, although I will say someone around me has a rooster because I hear it every morning. So I recommend personally raising your hens from what are called day-old chicks or week-old chicks. They're usually sexed, meaning that the breeder guarantees you're getting a female. And it's just a really fun way to enjoy the process. You get to see them grow up, and in the beginning of their life, they grow up extremely fast, extremely fast. They'll double in size in a week, and you go, what? You were so small just a week ago. So it's a very, very fun experience. What you'll need to do this, you'll need to find a reputable breeder in your area, and you can ask them questions about how they raise their hens and their baby chicks, and what do they do with their roosters and all that sort of stuff. Whatever level of diligence you want to do, you can ask friends and family if they've done it. But what you'll need is a brooding setup. So you'll need some sort of tub. I like to use just like a big metal tub that you can get at any old hardware store. And then you need heat and light, right? And you need some sort of shelter. So the way that I like to do this is I like to get what are called brooding heaters. And so instead of using like a heat lamp, which can cause a fire and it can actually dry out their butts and give them what's called pasty butt syndrome, which is when the droppings come out. Sometimes that can dry on their butt or their vent, and then it prevents other droppings from coming out and actually cause them to die. So you don't want that. So I really like the heating systems that are like a piece of heating element covered in a plastic material that they can kind of huddle under or huddle next to. I find that's a much safer option. And then you'll want some chick food, which is different from what's called layer feed, which is what you give them when they are laying eggs, higher in calcium. And you'll need to give them some water. And so the goal basically at this stage of life is to keep them fed, keep them well watered, make sure you don't introduce and see any diseases or pasty butt syndrome or any of these other conditions that they might suffer from. But I think just my experience, I've noticed a lot of fear mongering about how dangerous it could be in the early life of a hen. I've never really run into too many issues. The only thing that's happened to me is one of the hens from the recent batch that I raised was very wobbly when we got her. Her eyes were kind of going closed every so often. She looked tired all the time. And what I did in that case is I fed her an electrolyte solution with some probiotics. It was a probiotic mixture with a little bit of electrolyte, kind of like Gatorade for chickens almost. And that gave her enough energy because she wasn't really able to consume the food and digest that food well with the amount of energy that she had. So giving her that water mixture really perked her up and got her through that first couple days. I would say the first 5 days of a hen's life are for sure the most vulnerable, and there's the most things that can go wrong. If they're a little runt or a little stunted or a little weak, they can just kind of fail to thrive at that point in time, which is of course quite sad. So that's the thing I would caution against. But when you're talking about chickens, again, like from an egg cost perspective, if you're just analyzing it, the cost of the coop, the cost of the feed, any of the maintenance and the time it takes to care for them into the cost of a comparable egg product at a store, you're going to find that unless you're running this math for many, many years, it's probably not going to be cheaper, but you're not comparing it in an apples to apples way, in my opinion. What you're doing is you're saying, well, I can go get the cheapest eggs at the store for, $4 for a dozen. Why would I have a coop and raise these hens and spend the time? Well, think about what else you're getting. Activity. You are physically acting in the world, which I think all of us could use a little bit more of. You're getting the droppings from the hens that can go into your composting system, that can also go directly into the garden if you want to, if they're sort of scratching around. You get the pest control benefits. You have the companionship. You have a higher quality egg product. You have a pastured egg, effectively, is what you're going to be getting. So they're going to have hopefully enough room outside to run. They're going to have a much more varied and nutritious diet. They're going to have a darker yolk, a higher quality nutritional profile to the egg in most cases, and also simply put, a better flavor to the egg. The egg is going to taste very good. In fact, usually I give my mom like a dozen eggs when they're in high production, the epic flock. And when I run out and I don't have as many to give my mom, she will text me and say, I had to go back to buying grocery store eggs. I don't like them. They don't taste as good. And I really don't feel like I can go back. And so to me, you're getting what you pay for in a true sense. There's so many different benefits. And when you move into more of this producer mindset, I'm going to produce more, I'm not going to consume as much, and you build these homestead systems that we have discussed over the course of this week, And in the book, which is out now and you should grab a copy and you should tell your friends to grab a copy, you really start to understand a bit of the way these systems interconnect and the multiplying value you can get out of living a life in this fashion. I have so much joy when I get to go outside and see my hens running around the garden at sunset. I go grab some eggs. My girlfriend and I make a nice breakfast the next day. It just so happens to have also been with sourdough that we cultured and baked ourselves. Maybe that night we have some pizza. Oh, I'm going to throw an egg on that pizza, just see what happens, have some fun with it. It's just so much more enjoyable as a way of living. And when you look at what we've done as a society, technology has taken us to these incredible heights. It's why you can see me right now. It's why you can speak. I can speak to you. You can't speak to me just yet, but it's incredible. However, as human entities, as bodies, we haven't really changed a whole lot. And the way that society has taken us has removed some of the elements of life that are biologically, psychologically, deeply satisfying, nutritious, and healthy for us. And so bringing some of this stuff back, even if it takes a little more time, even if you're a little bit clumsy at the start of this homestead journey that you may want to go on, I think it is such a better way to live. Your life is happier when you do it. You are happier when you do it. It's more satisfying when you do it. To me, and trust me, I was this way many, many years ago myself. To me, consuming everything that I want to consume, my food, my clothes, my this, my that, and only producing maybe in a job that I might have, it's not very satisfying. I want to produce things in this world. I want to produce some stuff for myself. Yeah, is it as cost effective from a time or money perspective sometimes? No, sometimes I do want to make my own bread, right? Could I go get bread for very cheap? Yes, I probably could. But is it going to be freshly made from cultured sourdough that was cultured from yeast that was in the air at my house, and I had it the second it came out of the oven, or maybe after waiting 2 hours? But either way, no, it's not going to be that way. Did I make it with someone that I really care about? No, I didn't. I just went and bought it, right? So when you start shifting your mind and you start understanding the depth that you can access in your experience of life by going down a path like this. And the goal of this book, by the way, Epic Homesteading, is to show you how to do this at any scale. You do not have to go crazy with your chicken coop. You do not have to go crazy with your orchard or your energy or your garden or your rainwater systems or anything like that. You can start where you are. It's a mentality shift that I think is the important part of this whole equation. And I really encourage you guys to take your first step doing it. You can find the book anywhere books are sold. But again, if you do buy it from our store, we'll send you a free pack of botanical interest seeds along with your order. And you can also follow the Epic Homesteading journey over the last 3 years on the YouTube channel. We have over 300,000 subscribers now. You can follow along how I built all these things out. The book is more of a guidebook in one place that you can take with you through life. You can gift it to a friend who you know is into this, and it's just all of that information in one place in 224 illustrated pages. So check it out, guys. Thank you so much for your support on this journey we call Epic Gardening. Couldn't do it without you and wouldn't want to do it without you. So until next time, good luck in the garden and keep on growing.